I'm Cindy Briggs, and this is Soldier's Heart. There's this town in France that I desperately want to visit. It's called Oradour-sur-Glane, and it's about a 4-hour drive south from Paris. Oradour-sur-Glane is actually 2 towns, one that exists in the present and one that exists only in the past. On the 10th of June, 1944, just days after Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, the SS entered the town claiming a Nazi officer was being held there by the resistance. They sealed off the town under the guise of checking the papers of every citizen in search of resistance workers. Then the women and children were locked in the church. The town was looted. The men were led into barns where machine guns awaited them. What happened next? Well, there are no words in the English language to equate the horror. First, the men were machine gunned to the ground, but the SS gunners aimed only for their legs, felling them rather than killing them outright. Once all the men were unable to get away, the SS poured gasoline over them and set fire to the barns. Only 6 men managed to escape. 190 died. As for the women and children, an incendiary device was placed beside the church where they were being held. The SS ignited it, and as the church burned, those attempting to escape through the windows were shot by machine gun fire. 247 women and 205 children were murdered. There was one lone survivor from that church, 47-year-old Marguerite Rufanche. After she was shot, she crawled to a pea field where she hid overnight. All night she listened to the sounds of the SS finishing the job. They partially razed her village, destroyed her home. She was rescued the next morning, but I cannot even imagine how she must have felt, or if she ever recovered from that trauma. After the war, General Charles de Gaulle declared that the village should be rebuilt on a new site, and the devastated remains of the original village preserved forever as a blunt reminder of the atrocities committed by the Nazis during the occupation. You can go see it today, a ghost town of stone walls and empty streets, rusted cars and farm machinery, a perfectly charming little village full of perfectly ordinary French people just trying to survive the war, all wiped off the face of the earth in just a matter of hours. I tell you this story so you and I both remember how awful the French had it during the war. The occupation was devastating. The Germans invaded France on May 10, 1940, and established an occupying force of 300,000. France was technically divided into occupied France in the north, including Paris, and Free France in the south, including Bordeaux. But in truth, the Germans occupied everything and gradually denied more and more to the native citizens. The French suffered mightily over the next 5 years. The German army seized 80% of French food production for their own consumption and to send back home. The winters during the war were bitterly cold, and fuel was scarce. Curfews were put into place, and everything hallmark of French life, music, art, food, wine, was forbidden or stolen outright. And of course, there was the mass deportation and murder of Jewish people and those who dared to resist. But in spite of the hunger, deprivation, poverty, and the cruelty of the Nazi occupation, there were those who did choose to resist. This is a story of two young people in occupied France who refused to bow down before evil.
Well, I was born in Paris in February 7th, 1921, a lot of time.
This is Audrey Roche.
And when came the war, that's, I think, the part that interests you, I was in Bordeaux in the south of France. And Bordeaux was in the area that was occupied by the German forces. So I spent some years over there, and it was not a picnic, I can't say, because the German occupation was very hard.
André was on a school break in Bordeaux when the Germans invaded France. After the occupation, his college in Paris closed, and André found himself trapped, unable to return home. Like the rest of Europe, he'd anxiously watched for years as the Nazi Party gained strength and the threat of war loomed.
All Europe was afraid, really afraid. I remember in 1938, I had to go to the police station and receive a gas mask in 38. Wow. And there was, in this time, in 38, in 39, the, what do you name in English? There was cave or basement in the house.
A bomb shelter?
Bomb shelter, okay. And in 1938, it began to you in the street, you have the big bomb shelter, bomb shelter, bomb shelter. Oh, we were very conscious of it. And we were absolutely sure that one day we will be in war.
Life under the occupation was oppressive, and gradually André and his friends felt themselves crushed beneath the thumb of the Nazi Party.
Well, first we have, let's say, a curfew. Second, no dancing, no nothing. And I have a history for that. One of my co-students in the college in Bordeaux went to dine in a friend's house, and he let pass the time, the curfew. So he tried to come back to his home, but the French police arrested him, and they told him, "We arrest you because it's very dangerous. If the German arrest you, it's very..." So they went to the post of police with other people. But in this night, one German soldier was killed in Bordeaux, and the day after, the German came and caught every people that was in the different police stations, and they killed them. So my friend was killed because he was late to go home.
Oh my gosh. André's desire to escape France grew. He wanted to join in the fight against the Germans. Finally, he glimpsed his opportunity.
I was in college, and when the American forces invaded North Africa, I saw the possibility to escape, because escape from France to Great Britain was very, very complicated, practically impossible. But with the American forces in North Africa and the reconstitution of free French forces in North Africa, I saw the possibility to go there and to participate to that. So I escaped from France. I contacted some people of the resistance, and I have a means to cross the border between France and Spain. In the way to the border, I was arrested by the German police, but I escaped. And I passed the border in the Pyrenees, in the mountain, in February 1943.
Let's pause here a moment. André downplays the harrowing conditions he endured in order to escape France. Let's start with the mountains he crossed to get there. The Pyrenees divide France from Spain. Older than the Alps, this range extends over 300 miles, from the Bay of Biscay to the Mediterranean Sea, reaching altitudes up to 11,000 feet. On the French side, there are few foothills and no low passes. Crossing the Pyrenees under the best of conditions is incredibly hard. André did not have the best of conditions. First, he was fleeing for his life, with few provisions and weakened from years of deprivation. And beginning in 1943, just before André made his escape, the Germans increased their surveillance of the area, and arrests and deportations became more common. Nothing about his escape was simple or easy. In addition to all these obstacles, André escaped in February. He crossed those glacial mountains through freezing temperatures, climbing boulders, fording rivers, all under the greatest secrecy.
I was made prisoner by the German in a train between Bordeaux and the border, but I escaped. And when I came to a city in the south, the name of Bayonne, I had an address. So I went to see the person in this address, and they put me in a truck, and we went to the mountain. And in the mountain, I passed one night in a house where I suppose a lot of people passed through. And the day after, another person drove me with an old car, I remember, very close to the frontier. The border was in this part a little river, and I had to cross the river. And I crossed the river with the water up to my belt, and I assure you it was a mountain for the mountain. In February it was icy. Well, I could cross the river, and when I came the other night, about 300 or 400 meters after that, Spanish Guardia Civil, they caught me and they put me in prison. And I spent 3 months in jail in Spain. We had a jail, it was about 20 feet by 6, smaller than here. And we were 11 people inside. So many people that by night we couldn't all
Lay down?
lay on. One or two of us had to sit on the toilet, for instance. Well, I spent 3 months in, and I lost about 20 pounds. And one day, a warden told me, Roche, yeah, and they put me with others in a train, and we went to the border with Portugal. We crossed the border. The Portuguese people received us fantastic. Oh, very good. And we went to a port on Setúbal, just south of Lisbon, and they put us in a ship, and we reached Casablanca in Morocco.
By this time, Casablanca was under Allied control, so André was finally able to join up with the French army. He enlisted immediately and joined an officers' academy where he trained for 6 months and gained his commission as a second lieutenant. He was assigned to his regiment and returned to France to fight in July 1944, about 1 month after D-Day. For the next few months, the fighting was, in André's words, not very hard, as the Germans were in retreat. But in that fateful winter of 1944-45, the desperate German army rallied for one final push.
It was in February 1945. In February, we were fighting in Alsace. One day, we had to fight to take a village of the name of Gebsheim. It was very cold. I remember there was a foot of snow. We fought, and in the afternoon we received the order to go to another village, Durenenten, to help another unit because there was an attack from the Germans. And we went there. We came to Durenenten at 9 o'clock in the night, and we fought all the night in the cold and the snow. It was very, very, very hard. And in the morning, when the sun came out at 8 in the morning, because in winter in Alsace it's very light, we received the order to rest our men, and and the village was completely in ruin. But there was a corner of a house like this, a corner with part of the second floor. And in this part, under the floor, there was no snow, evidently. And there was a piano, a upright piano. And there I met 3 of my comrades, and one of them said, "Oh, I can play piano." So he played piano, and he played a piano sonata of Mozart. Dun 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 dun. And this elegant music in the middle of the fight, because there was fight, the fires, smoke, corpse everywhere. It was some fantastic contrast. We stayed watching, hearing this music, fantastic. It was an impression absolutely outerworldly, if you can say. And after that, we began again fighting. And incidentally, one of the 3 comrades, not the pianist, another one, was killed 1 hour after that. And every time I have the music, every time I hear this dun 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 dun, I am there.
Later that same month, André's war came to an end. One morning, after a particularly bitter all-night firefight, he was resting in a churchyard when a shell fell nearby. Both his legs were hit. He spent the next 3 months in German and French hospitals, and by the time he was released, the Germans had surrendered. The war was over for him. Earlier in this episode, I mentioned that this was a story of 2 young people who defied the German occupation. The other was André's wife, Paul. They met in Bordeaux, got engaged, and married in December of 1944 when André was home on leave. While he fought, she participated in the French resistance. In particular, she helped downed Allied airmen cross over the border to escape capture, and so they could continue to fight the Nazis. André told me about one time when she barely escaped capture. She and her brother helped 6 American airmen to a safe house.
There were 6 American over there. And once my wife told me that they were in the living room, and came the Gestapo. And my brother-in-law, he was 17 at this time, introduced them, and when he came in the living room,
Here, André paused and made a gesture we all know, a single finger placed to the lips. Shh. Paul and her brother indicated to the airmen that they should not say a word in front of the Gestapo. They were in street clothes, so unless they spoke English, there was no way for the Gestapo to know they were American.
And the Gestapo saw those people. He was looking for another thing, and he came out.
André's laughter says it all. The sweet feeling of getting one over on the enemy. The Gestapo was looking for someone else. He had no idea that the 6 men in that room were Americans. By their silence, they were saved. Of course, resistance work was incredibly risky. Paul literally risked her life every day in the effort. Was she afraid, or was she just so determined?
Well, she was determined, and she was afraid because all the family knew perfectly that if the German knew that, they was all in concentration camp, and nobody came out of the concentration camp. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After the war, Paul was awarded the highest civilian honors by the governments of France, England, and the United States. André showed me the letters she received for the citation for the Medal of Freedom from the U.S. You'll hear my voice break as I read it. André's too. So what I'm looking at here is a citation for the Medal of Freedom for, pronounce your wife's name for me, Paul?
Paul Roche.
Roche. French civilian, fought most courageously for the cause of liberty by rendering aid of exceptional importance to members of the American and British armed forces who were evading capture in the enemy-occupied countries of Europe. The courage, bravery, and exceptional devotion to the common cause of freedom displayed by this person in undertaking such hazardous duties, knowing the price to be paid if apprehended, were a definite contributing factor to the termination of hostilities in this theater, meriting the highest degree of praise. Well, that's just amazing.
Oh, it's really good. It's really because...
Yeah. This is from the President of the United States of America. Has directed me to express to Paul Marie Roche the gratitude and appreciation of the American people for gallant service in assisting the escape of Allied soldiers from the enemy. From Dwight D. Eisenhower. Mm-hmm. That's not too shabby.
And at this time, he was not the president. He was still the general commanding officer.
Yes. Wow. Well, that's amazing. I regret so much I never met Paul. She died in 2010. I wish I could share her voice with you too. After our interview, André showed me something miraculous. A notebook Paul kept of her resistance activities. It's hard to overstate how rare this sort of document is. If it had been discovered, it would have been her death sentence. André shared a wish to have it translated from French to English so he could share her bravery with a wider audience. Sometimes miracles happen. I introduced André to a friend of mine, Michael Huey, who happens to be an actor and a writer. Michael had connections in the French department at Wake Forest University. He wrote a grant and had Paul's notebook translated. From there, he wrote a one-woman play to tell her story. André was in attendance each night of the performance and answered questions about his beloved after the play. He and Michael continue to be fast friends. Their relationship and all that came from it is, for me, one of the most wonderful outcomes of this oral history project. It's easy and convenient to imagine that these heroes were left to rest on their laurels after the war. And indeed, André feels he's led a good life. But the war cost him more than the sum of his injuries.
I belong to a lost generation. But because I was just reaching 18, going out of high school, it's the time in my generation that you can begin to see the girls, to have parties, to go out, and apparently, no.
You missed it.
I didn't know all of that. And I lived that in the occupation and next to the war. And
then you were an adult.
An adult.
Yeah.
When the war finished, I was 24. Mm-hmm. So between 18 and 24, I think for the young people is a good time. We didn't have a good time. No. And I would say, even as I told you, the sacrifice the generation lost, those was my better years. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Soldier's Heart is written and produced by me, Cindy Briggs, and features veteran stories from North Carolina. We honor vets by listening to their stories. You can follow along on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Soldier's Heart NC. If you have an idea for a story or interview, email us at soldiersheartnc@gmail.com. Special thanks to the New Winston Museum of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where all of these stories are archived. You can learn more about the museum at newwinston.org.